Hello, everyone. My name is Mama Bunny, and I'm so happy to see you here back at the burrow. And to all of our new friends, hello. It's so nice to meet you. How was your day? I hope it went well. And now that you're here, my day's gotten even better. For tonight's story, we're gonna see how Clifford Cookie Crazy ends. And if you haven't heard the first part, well, this might be a little confusing. So make sure you catch up on the first part. Now then, we can't have this sweet treat of a story unless we're all comfy cozy. So make sure you're wearing something comfy. And don't forget to bring your favorite stuffy. I think they're gonna want to hear the story too, don't you? Well then, are we all comfy? Let's get started, shall we? Tonight's story is Clifford Cookie Crazy. Clifford, T-Bone, and Cleo were still nosing around the fair, and they stopped in front of a big taffy machine. T-Bone licked his lips. Sticky, yummy taffy. The dogs watched the machine pull the taffy, this way and that way. Clifford felt a little dizzy. But then he smelled something else. Something even better. Clifford sniffed. Do you guys smell that? Cleo and T-Bone lifted their noses. I sure do, said T-Bone. Scrum-dum delicious, Cleo said. Clifford had to follow that scent. Let's go, he said. The smell led the dogs past the pizza booth, the donut table, and the hamburgers cooking on a grill. Right up to a tent on the other side of the fair. It's coming from in there, said T-Bone, and they all stuck their heads under the tent. A cookie, Clifford gasped. And what an amazing cookie! He wagged his tail so hard. Flags flapped in the wind. Hats flew off heads. Cotton candy blew off sticks. Pinwheels spun wildly. Wow, said T-Bone. That's one big cookie, said Cleo. Clifford's eyes grew wide. It was big, not like the toy ball he'd squashed, or the police car he couldn't fit into. It's just my size. Minutes passed, and the dogs couldn't stop looking at the cookie. It was the most amazing thing. Finally, T-Bone and Cleo shook their heads, and they turned away from the cookie. And T-Bone shrugged. Well, it's not on the ground. And it's not headed that way, Cleo put in. And then T-Bone and Cleo said together, so it's not for the dogs. And it's not okay. But Clifford didn't say a word. He just kept staring. It was like the cookie had him under a spell. Uh-oh, said T-Bone. Maybe we should get out of here. Cleo noticed Clifford too. He had a funny look on his face. Right, she said. Let's go. Cleo and T-Bone wiggled out of the tent. But Clifford was rooted to the spot. He didn't move. Cleo tapped him. Clifford, we need to go now. Clifford still didn't move. Come on, big guy, Cleo said a little louder. She scooted back inside the tent. She waved her paws in big motions. Clifford didn't even look at her. Clifford has gone cookie crazy, said T-Bone. He crawled inside next to Cleo. Cleo nodded. Well, it's the first time he's ever seen a cookie that big. It's his size. He's gotta forget about it, said T-Bone. And we've gotta help. Cleo and T-Bone led Clifford to the other side of the fairgrounds. A flying disc lay on the ground. T-Bone picked it up. How about a game of catch, Clifford? That should take your mind off that cookie. T-Bone flung the disc. Cleo leapt in the air. She caught it in her mouth. Here it comes, big guy, Cleo shouted to Clifford. Clifford nodded, but he wasn't really listening. A big treat must be for someone big, he told himself. And I'm the biggest someone I know. Clifford, heads up, yelled Cleo. Uh-huh. Clifford looked up. The disc was flying right at him, but he didn't see a disc. He saw a cookie. Clifford bit the disc. Snap! It broke in half. Clifford, Cleo said, you're eating our toy. It was a toy, not a cookie. Clifford spit out the disc. Oops, sorry, guys. You've got to get your mind off that cookie, Clifford, said Cleo. I'm trying, Cleo. Clifford trailed off. In the distance, a man was selling balloons. But Clifford didn't see balloons. He saw sugar cookies floating in the air. But everywhere I look, all I see are big, sweet cookies. Clifford spotted the Ferris wheel next. In a flash, he took off running. Cleo and T-Bone raced after him. Clifford, come back, they shouted. I've just got to have it, Clifford said, still running. Stop, T-Bone shouted. Clifford stopped. Uh-huh. He looked at Cleo and T-Bone. Then he looked back at the Ferris wheel. Oh, he said, it's only a Ferris wheel. Cleo shook her head. Poor guy. He has a bad case of cookie-itis. All at once, a breeze blew. It carried the cookie smell right up to Clifford's nose. A silly grin spread over his face. Clifford, said T-Bone. Clifford, said Cleo. Clifford didn't answer. In a daze, he sniffed and sniffed, and he ran right to the cookie tent. There it was, the giant cookie. It looked just as yummy as it did before. So delicious, so chewy. Clifford couldn't see or think of anything else. Clifford was half in the tent and half out of the tent. The tent was too small, but that cookie was just right. I know I shouldn't eat it, he said, and I won't. I just want to look at it and maybe take one little sniff. He put his nose close to the cookie. And just then, his friends wiggled into the tent. "Clifford!" And they shouted. Surprised, Clifford jumped. His nose bumped into the cookie. Snap! Off came a big chunk. It fell to the ground with a thud. The dogs edged closer. "Wow," T-Bone said. "A piece of cookie's on the ground." "It was an accident," Clifford said. Cleo eyed the giant cookie crumb. "You know the people food rule. If it drops on the ground, or it's headed that way," T-Bone put in. "It belongs to the dogs," said Clifford. "And that's okay." Clifford's eyes grew bright. "That's the rule, so let's eat." T-Bone and Cleo looked at each other, and they nodded. "You can have it, Clifford," said T-Bone. "It's all yours," Cleo added, and they knew how important it was to Clifford. "Really?" Clifford picked up the cookie chunk. "Thanks." He chewed a few times and then gulped. He smiled. And that was so good. And then T-Bone glanced at the cookie. "Gee, it looks kind of funny now. It's missing a big piece." Clifford followed his gaze. It was true. The giant cookie was uneven. "I know," said Clifford. "We can eat all around the cookie. We'll even it out. And that way, nobody will notice a piece is missing." It seemed like a good idea to Cleo and T-Bone too. The dogs stood in different spots around the giant cookie. "Nibble, nibble," went T-Bone. "Nibble, nibble," went Cleo. "Chomp, chomp," went Clifford. Finally, they stopped. Cleo and T-Bone were so full, their bellies sagged to the ground. "That was a tough job," said Cleo. "But it had to be done, and we were just the dogs to do it." "I can't eat another bite," T-Bone said. He yawned. "Me neither," Cleo said in a sleepy voice. Guys?" Clifford gazed at the cookie. "Doesn't it still look funny, a little lopsided?" T-Bone and Cleo slumped to the ground. "Maybe a little," Cleo said. She closed her eyes. "We'll have to eat some more," said T-Bone. He tried to stand. "And that's okay," Clifford told them. "You've helped enough. I'll fix it myself," he said bravely. A crowd stood by the cookie tent. Emily Elizabeth, Mr. Howard, and almost everyone from Birdwell Island were there. Mr. Bleakman faced them. Sheriff Lewis sat in the crane. He was ready to raise the tent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Bleakman said, "get ready to see the biggest sugar cookie ever. A real Clifford-sized treat." Emily Elizabeth laughed. "He's right," Mr. Howard told her. "Just wait until Clifford sees it." Sheriff Lewis pulled a lever. The tent lifted up a bit. Everyone leaned forward to see. There were Cleo and T-Bone, fast asleep. The crane lifted the tent higher, and there was the cookie stand. But no cookie. Just a big red dog. Everyone gasped. "Clifford!" Mr. Bleakman said, shocked. Clifford jumped to his feet. He saw the empty cookie stand. He didn't mean to eat the whole thing. Emily Elizabeth ran to him. "What happened, Clifford?" she asked. Clifford whined. He was so sorry. Mr. Bleakman's face turned bright red.
"That big red rascal ate my cookie."
Mrs. Bleakman rushed over to her husband. She patted his arm.
Now, Horace, you can't really blame Clifford, can you?" "What?"
Mr. Bleakman asked.
"Well, you made a delicious smelling."
Mr. Bleakman nodded.
"Yummy looking."
True, Mr. Bleakman said.
"Crunchy sounding, scrum-dum delicious cookie."
Mr. Bleakman smiled.
How could the poor dog help himself?
Mrs. Bleakman finished.
Mr. Bleakman closed his eyes.
He pictured his giant cookie.
It was beautiful, wasn't it?
Emily Elizabeth stepped closer. "Oh, Mr. Bleakman." Her voice trembled. She felt so bad. "I'm so sorry Clifford ate your cookie. And I know Clifford is very sorry too." Clifford dropped his head close to Mr. Bleakman. He put his paw over his eyes. Then he peeked out.
"Well,"
Mr. Bleakman said slowly,
"it was a pretty great cookie. I can't blame Clifford. He saw something that was just his size, and he couldn't help himself. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes."
Mrs. Bleakman reached for his hand.
"Even you make mistakes, right, Horace?"
"Yes, Violet," said Mr. Bleakman with a smile.
"Even I make mistakes, like leaving that big cookie near a very big dog."
Clifford licked Mr. Bleakman's cheek.
Okay, I forgive you."
Mr. Bleakman sighed.
"I just wish there was some way everyone could have seen my cookie."
Mr. Howard stepped forward.
"I think I know a way."
The next day, an even bigger crowd stood by the cookie tent. A big photograph of Mr. Bleakman and his cookie rested on the stand.
"It's a real winner,"
said Mrs. Bleakman. Clifford leaned closer. He sniffed the picture.
"And do you know the best part?"
said Mr. Bleakman.
"I can leave this cookie alone, even with Clifford around." Woof!
Clifford leaned closer to the picture. It looked so yummy, so big, so Clifford-sized. Clifford wanted to nibble it. But he wouldn't make that mistake twice. The end. I'm so glad that everything worked out, and that Mr. Bleakman forgave Clifford. We all make mistakes, even Mama Bunny. Well, little ones, it's getting late, and we should go to sleep. So, get all snuggled up underneath your blanket. Hold your favorite stuffy tight, 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 so they know they are loved. Oh, and dream some wonderful dreams. And while you're having those wonderful dreams, I'll get our story ready for next time. How does that sound? And always remember, Mama Bunny loves you very, very much. Good night.